Okay, guys, the verdict is in, and Bill Cosby is guilty of 3 counts of sexual assault. And now we await sentencing, where the current take is that we'll hear in one form or another how America's father will spend the rest of his life behind bars. The Me Too Time's Up crowd is jumping for joy, and undoubtedly a slew of Cosby's alleged victims are lining up to take aim at pillaging his estate. I can just see them all now, jumping up and down like first graders at the ice cream truck, screaming, "Me too, me too." Gynotrads, too, will be getting their jollies, basking in what they imagine is schadenfreude, as Dr. Huxtable is tossed into a small cage to live what will undoubtedly be a much shorter version of what would have remained of his life. Such is what he deserves, right? He harmed all those innocent women, and now he has to pay. At least that's the point of view of those dumb enough to be blue pill, people whose thinking is guided by hashtags and other popular slogans of sexual politics. And mind you, I have to say that I'm not exactly bleeding sympathy for old Bill myself. Whether he committed actual sexual assault aside, it is clear that over decades of life, he was a completely dedicated pussy hound, a gynocentrist of the first order, driven to arrange his life around women. That alone is begging for problems, never mind the abandonment of self and values that come with the territory. Guilty or innocent of the criminal charges, Cosby's own petard blew up in his face. And of course, that ought to make any man with a bit of common sense take notice. There, but for a streak of dumb luck, go a lot of men. To illustrate this further, I want to take a closer look at 1970s drug culture, the very environment from which so many of these allegations sprang. Well, allegations from a slew of women who are bound by 2 common denominators: accusations against Bill Cosby and the expiration of their sexual use-by dates. Full disclosure here, as an overly active part of 1970s drug culture, I have my own stories to tell, and I remember one clearly that paints a pretty damn good picture of the times. I was at a party, I think it was around 1977, but to be honest, those were some pretty fuzzy years. There was this dude sitting there across from me on a sofa. He dropped a respectable-sized rock of cocaine on a mirror and began ritualistically chopping at it with a razor blade. I remember thinking he was practiced, working the blade with blinding speed, turning the rock into powder and then turning the powder into a big fat line that ran crossways on the mirror. As he shaped and reshaped that line of coke, a rather fetching young woman took a seat next to him on the sofa. She was ample-breasted and wearing a low-cut sweater. She leaned toward him and smiled, her breast more or less on full display, and put her hand on his knee. The guy just kept working the cocaine. Finally, the woman said, "That line really looks delicious." He stopped for a moment and asked her name. She smiled and told him. He then asked her what she did for a living. "I'm a stewardess," she said. "Oh," he said, "I guess you make a pretty good living at that." He pulled a short straw out of his shirt pocket. The woman smiled again and said, "Yeah, I do okay." "Well, then tell me," he said, "why don't you have any cocaine?" He then bent forward and hoovered the entire line up through the straw. Now, of course, I was way too gynocentric at the moment to appreciate the awesome display of red pill awareness that I'd just witnessed. Or maybe it wasn't red pill awareness. Maybe it was just a guy used to shooing women off in order to hang on to his stash. Either way, it would take me many more years and a few rounds of getting burned to begin to wake up on that level. And the scenario did paint a similar picture of my life at the time, too. I used to do a lot of drugs. I wasn't what you'd call a big-time dealer or anything, though I often did buy drugs in some quantity and sold enough to friends to help defray the cost of my own. And one thing was certain. Whenever I was flush with drugs, I also had women around me. So did a lot of men. Money and fame both have the same effect. The more you have, the more women flock to you. That was true in the 1970s, and it's true today. Resources attract women like moths to a flame. You can Me Too and Time's Up all day, every day, but it won't change the fact that access to resources and power through men is the primary attractor for women. How much action would ugly-ass Mick Jagger have seen in his life if he was a cab driver? So, I'm sitting here just wondering why Cosby was reduced to doping women, slipping them drugs so they'd lose control and he could access them sexually. Oh, but wait. That isn't what happened. At least not for the 3 counts of sexual assault for which he was convicted. In reading through accuser Andrea Constand's account, she didn't even allege that he slipped her the drugs without her knowledge. She alleged that Cosby gave her 3 pills and some wine, telling her that they were just pills that would relax her. This was, according to her, after Cosby had made at least 2 attempts at being sexual with her, which she rebuffed. So let's see if we can paint this picture accurately. A grown woman went alone at night to Bill Cosby's residence after he had twice attempted to have sex with her, took the drugs he offered without knowing what they were or even asking, had sex, and then sold that story as a rape. Well, of course, the jury believed her. After all, women don't lie about these things. And they take drugs from men who are pursuing them sexually without knowing what they are or what those men want. It doesn't cross their minds that the rich, powerful man handing them drugs late at night, men who have already established their sexual interest, might still have sex in mind. Poor darling. I'm sure she thought Cosby invited her up for a Bible study. Another pitiable dear I read about found herself drugged and having sex with Cosby several times over a period of years. But I shouldn't judge, I guess. I'm sure the woman bore no responsibility for being raped in the same way by the same man over and over again over a period of years. After all, it's not like she could just quit being around him. Anyway, that story and a lot of others came from an article at thecut.com, linked, where 35 of Cosby's accusers tell their own stories. None of the stories are particularly remarkable, mind you. Each one pretty much told a variation of all the others. Some women claim to have apparently been slip drugs, but that was not what Cosby was convicted for. They all went to Bill Cosby's place alone, partied with him, had sex, were raped, and then spent the next few decades summoning the courage to talk about it. The only other thing remarkable about the Cut.com article is that there are pictures of all 35 women. All of them, every last one, is dressed quite intentionally in white. Of course, the preferred color of pure, unblemished brides and coke-whores. No wonder they say we live in a rape culture. At least half the sex between all Westerners in the 1970s was rape, apparently, thanks to retroactive definitions and hashtag movements. This is all part and parcel to what feminists want in the world. It's been speculated quite a bit that the Me Too movement probably had an influence on the Cosby trial, and I think it obviously did. Consensual partying and sex sends a man to prison decades later because rape, my friends, is whatever women want it to be. Chalk this up as a score for the sexual robotics industry, at least until they criminalize that too. And that is it for this talk. I want to close with a note on registerher.net. It appears to have already had a good effect. Once we launched, I was tweeting about it regularly with names of the women who are now listed on the site. Now I've been given a lifetime stretch in Twitter jail. They claim that my tweeting the truth about women who lie about rape is targeted harassment. Oh well, screw them and the false accusers that they want to protect. There's more going on in social media than Twitter. And it must mean that I'm doing something right. At any rate, folks, as usual, I hope you've enjoyed, even if you haven't, and we'll see you next time.